some of the viewers' questions to you, because I know that you're willing to address these head-on. One of the conditions for the easing of the lockdown is, of course, having a look at future variants. So Philip says via email, is there any evidence that current vaccines are fully effective against all variants and possible future variations? And if not, what do we do?
Right. OK, so let me chop that answer up into bits. We've just in the last few days got quite a lot of really good evidence about the vaccines we've deployed in the UK, starting slowly in December, but really going at quite some pace in January and February. And the kind of headline results there are that from the study in healthcare workers, we're reducing infections, both symptomatic and asymptomatic, after one dose only by over 75%. And that goes up further to about 85%, that kind of figure, after the second dose. We've also got data from Public Health England looking at the over 80s. And here again, there are very clear signs that the vaccines we've got are reducing both infections and the likelihood of being hospitalised and the likelihood of dying in the over 80s if you have one dose.
So
and
this is really,
let me finish. The Scottish data is really, really impressive, and it shows that hospital admissions from both vaccines after one dose are reduced by 85%. So to get to your point about variants, all of that data really have been collected when the dominant virus in the UK has been what we know as now B117, or the mutation that first arose in Kent, because that's everywhere in the UK. It's 95% of our disease now. So yes, our vaccines are working against the current variant. Okay. Do we have direct data that they're going to work against South Africa or Brazil? No, we don't. We have some evidence from the clinical trials for some of the vaccines, but until really these vaccines come up against those new variants in large scale, we'll have to wait for those answers. But I still think they're going to reduce the likelihood of having severe disease.
Excellent answer, and I'm sorry for even trying to interrupt you. I feel ashamed of myself.
For once.
Always let Professor Van-Tam finish.
Quite right.
I was really going to try and put it into the context of the roadmap the Prime Minister set out here, which everyone is obviously very hopeful will be how he hopes it to be, and that by June the 21st we get our freedom back. The crucial first test is coming up with the kids going back to school. There are other parts of the UK doing this a different way to the way that England is. And there is a concern, isn't there, that when you send millions of kids back into classrooms, that the issue may not be safety for them and getting the disease badly, or even for teachers, although obviously there's a risk there, but the kids taking the virus potentially back into homes with older relatives who've not been vaccinated. How concerned are you about that? And when will you know, do you think, about the impact after March 8 of unlocking the schools again?
So you've absolutely nailed the science, Piers. You've got it right.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
That you've got it right, that when children mix, they are not at risk, but undoubtedly there will be occasions when schools go back where infection is brought into households. We just know that is a fact, and most scientists have said very clearly that reopening schools has an effect on R. But as we're kind of opening schools in this direction, we are pressing down on the virus in the opposite direction, and more of our priority cohorts are being vaccinated. It's hundreds of thousands of people a day, and it can peak at over 500,000 a day. So we have already completed that first dose in cohorts 1 to 4, the offer, and the uptake has been absolutely astonishing, significantly over 90% in all of the groups so far. And so from that perspective, we just keep going really as fast as we can with the vaccination. And I think because we're, first of all, taking out of the line of fire those older people in households through the vaccine programme, we probably won't see the same kind of impact from opening schools as we might have done in a pre-vaccination era. So we're in a different space now, and I say we've got to do it. I say we've absolutely got to, because of the welfare of children, both mental, educational, physical. The whole spread of child welfare depends upon them going back to school, and I think we are in a much more optimistic place now because of the quite stunning effects so far of a vaccine programme, and we're probably only a quarter to a third of the way through it.
Well, to hear optimism expressed by you is reassuring, I think, for everybody, particularly for parents who are about to send their children back to school. You talk about confidence in the vaccination programme, and we have congratulated all those involved in the vaccination programme, because whatever other criticisms they are, it has been a fantastic success. However, there is still hesitancy amongst some groups, and I will put to you something that Tracy on Twitter has asked, because I don't think that this is an anti-vax point. I think this is a really legitimate concern, considering that the Department of Health has said to pregnant women that unless, you'll be able to correct me on the wording, but unless it's a sort of, really difficult situation you're in and exposed to, you probably shouldn't get the vaccine. So Tracy says, is the vaccine safe for women who are thinking of starting a family in the next 12 months or longer? And do you know what side effects, long-term or short-term, there are from having the vaccine?
I better chop that up into bits, Susanna, again. So the first thing to say is all of the clinical trials were performed in people who had lots of kind of exclusions, and one of them was being pregnant, because you never start clinical trials in pregnant women. That always follows later. And those trials are underway, actually. So basically, you don't have many, you don't have any pregnant women when you enroll them in the trial. And then inevitably, there are some people who fall pregnant during the course of the trial. And they are followed very, very carefully. And they are still being followed very, very carefully, but the numbers are very small. So when we say, for the time being, we advise the vaccine in pregnant women who are really at very significant risk of COVID-19, we are saying not that we believe it is unsafe in the wider population of pregnant women, but we don't yet have that extensive data, but we will have in time. And right now, if you are pregnant and you have very significant health conditions that mean, you might die of COVID, then for goodness sake, have that conversation with your doctor about whether it's the right thing for you to do. But I wouldn't have any hesitation in having that discussion personally with a pregnant woman who was at very high risk.
And
on the wider point you make,
on the fertility issue.
I'm thinking of having a family in the next year or so. Should I defer the vaccine? And all this nonsense that is out there too about fertility. There's just no evidence at all that there are any issues in relation to planning a family or fertility. So no, if you're in a risk condition and you're called, then my advice would be to get on and take the vaccine.
We're in the sort of final stages, hopefully, of this war, but it does rely on compliance. And one big issue is people not wanting to have the vaccine. And Sir Patrick Vallance rolled out the 80% maths equation here. Let's say 80% of people are adults, he said. Assume that 80% of those adults take the vaccine and you get 80% vaccine efficacy. You've then got roughly 50% protection across the population, which is not actually great, is it? So what do we do about those people who simply don't want to have it? And in particular, given your background, what do you feel about people who work in the NHS or in care homes who are refusing to have the vaccine?
Right. So you asked two questions there, Piers. The first one is really about people who don't want to have it. And what I think I'd do is I'd say I'd chop that up a bit again into people who have accepted it, people who say, I am just never having a vaccine in my life, and I wish they didn't have that view, but that is their view. And there are a lot of people in the middle who I think are more likely to be in a position of, well, I'm just going to wait and see a bit longer. But actually, the data don't show that. The data show that it's, well over 90% in the over 80s, well over 90% in the 75 to 79s, and well over 90% in the 70 to 74s, etc. And as we come down, we are down the ages, the priority groups. We're just being constantly surprised that people are very, very accepting and get it, that one thing this vaccine appears now to do from the latest data is it breaks the link between you getting this and you ending up in hospital.
Yeah. And in relation specifically to people working in the NHS and care homes, do you think they should be either mandated to have the vaccine or step aside from their work until this is over?
Well, I agree with Professor Whitty that I think healthcare workers have always had a professional responsibility to take steps themselves to prevent them from being in a position where they could harm patients through their infectious diseases they might have. And, that's been a very clear position on hepatitis B vaccine and performing invasive procedures, particularly surgery, for decades and decades. And so, I just think that's a professional standard that everybody ought to adhere to. Now, the other way of framing this is saying, if you're a consumer of healthcare, if you're a patient or a relative, would you prefer a healthcare worker to attend you or your relative if they have been vaccinated against COVID? Or would you not really mind either way? And I'm asking that question to you two.
I think that's a very good question. And I think that becomes down to choice. I agree. I guess it also plays into the wider question of vaccine passports and whether, as we come out of this, whether it is morally justified for a government to say, for example, that if you want to go into restaurants or gyms or bars or nightclubs to get them back open again to recharge the economy, then you have to show, as they're now doing in Israel, they're now showing a vaccine certificate. Do you support that? Do you think there's a moral issue in telling people you've got to show a bit of paper to show you've been vaccinated before you can have your freedom fully back?
Well, I think the government's, announced that it's going to look at this and look at the whole area in quite some detail. And it wouldn't be right of me to comment at that point, other than to say I think they are plausible arguments. And there are plausible arguments for and plausible arguments against. But we've never lived in a society here where we force medical treatments upon people.
The reason I'm asking you, actually, is your grandfather served briefly as the Prime Minister of the state of Vietnam in the 1950s, which is an amazing fact I didn't know. A, tell me about that, and B, has that given you, given your very high profile, given you're probably the most trusted man in Britain right now, has it given you any political aspirations to perhaps run for high office like your grandfather?
No, it hasn't. I think, I guess I reflect on my grandfather, Ong Noi, and I guess I think that he must have given me something in terms of maybe my ability to kind of operate in that interface between science, medicine and politics, which is a very difficult interface. But have I ever been tempted to go on the other side into the political arena? Absolutely not.